John, you brought it up already. The faders are not what we use to set level on an instrument. So the best way for me to explain that is that we have a ideal signal, right? Because all of this is electricity, really. It's pulses running down a wire, right? And so, like any electrical signal, you need a certain strength in order for that to come in with clarity and carrying, I guess, information, all of the information that it has within that signal, right? Yeah. So if you run this knob too quietly, the signal is weak, so it's going to sound thin. It's not going to necessarily carry as well. You're going to lose detail. But when you get, and if you run that too hot, you're inevitably going to run into distortion and I'm sure feeding back and over all of those overwhelming things, right? So with this very first knob, which different boards call it different things. Some call it a trim. Some call it a head amp. Yamaha boards use head amp a lot. But for Soundcraft, they just call it a gain, which is great. Gain, trim, head amp. Some of them just say amp. But that's essentially what it is we call this the preamplifier. So this is what's going to get our signal to a usable level. Ideally, every instrument that you plug into this, you're going to set at the knob in various places with the goal of having all of the signals. Oh, sorry, I thought that was a crunch from the sound system. No, I'm like, oh no, what did I press? All of the various signals in that are coming into your mixer, you want them to kind of live in that same good signal strength, if that makes sense. And then these are for the mixing. So these are what set your level to the appropriate volume for each channel, and then this is how we blend those signals together. So does that make sense? So to explain it in from an instrument perspective, right? A drum set is going to need way less gain than a violin, right? But in order for the drum set and violin to be coming in correctly with whatever microphone or quarter inch or however you're running that into the board, you want to make sure that the drum set level and those violin levels are still coming in at an appropriate signal level. So that signal is good.
Drums that needs less help.
Right, exactly. And that's why we call it a pre-amplifier, right? It's that very first level of gain is what we say. It's the very first place that I can turn anything up. So I want to make sure that is as loud and as clear and as strong as I can get it without distorting. Okay. And then what's nice about that is if we did that, so the general rule of thumb, am I good to just touch all of this? Okay. Yeah. So the general rule of thumb is when I do that, I can set all of these faders to 0 and my mix will already sound pretty even. Because if you think about it from like a mathematical or like a metered perspective, all of our instruments are coming in at essentially a mixed level already. Because if we set all of those inputs at the same volume, we're going to already have a fairly balanced mix from instrument to instrument. Okay. Does that make sense? So, good to go back to why you were so correct about this being the first level and this being just for small adjustments, is that if you set this signal properly, all you should be having to do is small micro adjustments. Yeah. And typically, what I have found is when you get that input level set, you don't even have to run these as loud either. You have a lot more control. We call that fader throw. So when I have bad input signal, typically I'm going to be pushing this all the way up, and I'm only going to have about this much room to play with it. And that probably is a signal to me or a sign to me that my fader or my preamp level is set too low. Because I'm having to crank the fader way up to get that volume, and I don't have really that much control over it. Versus when I have a really strong, clean signal, I can usually make adjustments like this, and that signal is it's just like total control. You can hear it shift every move you make, kind of thing. Does that make sense? Yeah. So all of those things kind of are interrelated when we get into sound. So that's kind of the first knob, let's say, right? So all the way across that's what this red knob is doing pretty much that whole time. If I actually, do you have like a CD or something you could play for me just so I can? If not, it's not a huge deal. I wanted to see if there was a way for me to show you what a signal looks like a good signal strength.
Can I play like a YouTube video?
Yeah, that's great. anything that gives me a meter to play with. So if that's the video channel here, right?
Yeah.
I don't even need
I'm gonna have to turn on the computer.
That's fine. So I'll show you what I consider to be like a proper input level on a board like this. It's pretty easy though. Like usually I leave it like on an old analog board like this. Digital boards are a little bit different, but on a board like this, I'd probably leave it between like -6 and 0, or even -12 and -3. So it's kind of that like 6 to 9 decibel range, and that really depends on like like what you're metering. Usually what I say is the strongest signal, so the absolute loudest hit, the loudest note somebody can sing, the loudest an instrument can strum or play or pluck, I want it living in that 0 range.
Okay.
And that way, if something goes really hard or really wrong, I still don't distort.
Okay.
So there's plenty of room there. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's just all about control.
Okay.
And
Sorry. That CD player does not work.
huh?
That
Oh, it's
CD
not.
player does not work.
I'm not. And what's nice is that even though we're going to show you with the video, the technique is the same. All you're doing for any other instrument is looking for that same metered space, right?
Yeah.
And then making the adjustments with the fader to the appropriate volume. So whether it's a video, a CD, a microphone, a drum set, a piano, all of it metered, all of it kind of trims or gain stages the same at that preamp level. We're looking for the real word of the day is that signal strength. We want that signal strength to be good. And what's counterintuitive for a lot of people in that realm too is that having good signal strength means that I'm inevitably going to fade back or feedback because it's loud, quote unquote. But that's not true. This is what's controlling what you're hearing in the room. So you could have this at the appropriate signal strength, and your fader may need to be way down here to have that be clean in the room and not feeding back and not causing issues. But that's okay because we want that signal strength to be good still. That means that the equipment on that end is being used correctly. Does that make sense? So even if the fader's way down here and that's what sounds good, that's better than this. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
This means you have infinite control. This means something's gone wrong. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So anyway, so there's that. Oh, do you have the thing to play? Is it playing already?
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, so actually this is a good example. So see how like, what it would be like an appropriate for me? Right, like, that's a pretty decent volume. Like, it's not like too crazy loud or anything. And we're way down here. So that means that channel is probably gained into a pretty good space. Let me see if I can remember. Oh yeah, it's doing it already. I guess that is kind of going to the main, but that's fine. You can do it that way. So this is, so right now this is this PFL. This is the pre-fader level. That's what that PFL means. I'm trying to find that PFL button to make sure that. I just don't want to tell you the wrong thing here. Oh. So that,
Oh, okay.
do you get what I'm saying? So right now, this is after fader level. AFL means after fader, and that is all the way down. So when I go PFL, that's pre-fader level on that video. So that actually is too loud of a signal. So if I trim that down, which we can always put it back, I always try and remember. So if I touch a knob, I try and remember where it was in case my change is wrong or change like messes something up. I'll go video, I'll come down here, and I'll crunch it down to that 0 spot that we were talking about before. Okay. So do you see how much room I have? Mm-hmm. That means all that means to me is control. Like, it's like, okay, I know that the computer, even if all of a sudden there was a big part in the song or something else, I've got plenty of room. It's not gonna go crazy on me. Let's turn that off, and now you see how low I am? But do you hear that crunchiness kind of went away? There's a crunchiness here. Oh, yeah. but we're still not distorting, so it really, you're not gonna really hear anything terrible until it's way up.
Oh yeah.
That's what happens. That's what it sounds like when you're crunching it, too much. And with the thing that's really nice about old boards like this is, cool. First that. So that button is this PFL, that pre-fader level. So, yep.
Cool.
So I was just gonna say, so when we're leveling something, just like you saw me do with the video feed there, I'm gonna go to pre-fader level, and that means that this meter here is showing me the signal coming into the board at this space.
Yeah.
So pre-fader means everything before the fader. So that's what this is going to show me. So what that means is that I can mute the whole channel. So let's say I have, okay, this is the pulpit or the lectern. Let's do piano instead. So let's say that like I mute the piano and I just say, hey, can you play something for me so I can get a level? If you've ever heard a sound guy say that, that's what he's talking about basically.
Okay.
Sorry, I should probably mask up. Let's drink your coffee and forgot. What he's actually checking is signal, and that's why sometimes you'll hear a sound guy go, everybody stop playing for a second, because if he's trying to get a signal level and he's seeing all the meters over here, it's just a little confusing sometimes. You get used to it, and then pretty soon you don't need to ask people to stop. You can just kind of do it while they're all messing around. But to start, it's nice to make sure, at least when I was starting out, I like to do it kind of almost in sequence. Like I'd start from stage left to stage and work stage right and have everybody just do it one at a time. And that's how we still do it at the Ren. When we do like head mics and stuff, I have everybody walk through one at a time. If I get in a pinch, I'll do it on the fly. But yeah. So anyway, let's say the piano player is playing something beautiful for us. I'm gonna go to pre-fader level, and I'm going to make sure again that is either living kind of basically in that -9 to -0 space. Obviously, a piano player, and very depending on the player itself too, or the player themselves as well, are going to hit harder or lighter. There's going to be sections where they're playing very light, and then sections where they're playing very heavy. So usually I'll ask them if I know the songs in the set, or I'll just say, hey, can you play like what would be like one of the like heavier or louder portions of the service today? I have them bang that out for me so that I can hear it. I level it to that space using the pre-fader level knob in the trim. And then once they're leveled in that space, I can turn that knob off and they're ready to go. And I know that they're signaled. I know their signal is coming in good, and not just by ear, but by meter, right? And that's that's what the meters are for. They're to almost get more of a scientific measurement on signal strength. That's basically what they're for, especially that pre-fader button. So yeah, that PFL knob is extremely valuable. Again, you can do it by ear. If something's distorted, you have to turn the trim knob down. If it's too quiet, you got to turn the trim knob up. But metering it with that, infinitely helpful. So that we'll say that that's all phase one, right?
Awesome.
Yep. Any questions on any of that?
John, I've been responding mostly. How are you doing over there?
I'm doing good, and it's making sense.
Okay, good.
What'd you get from Starbucks?
It's actually from Nickel and Bean.
Oh.
It's that new coffee shop in Lexington. Yeah. That's where I live.
It looks like Starbucks. I guess it's just a
Yeah. No, but they're great. I've grown to really appreciate them. I can walk to them in the morning. It's really, it's lovely. I've spent too much money on coffee there, that's for sure. And they have this breakfast sandwich. It's perfect. Anyway, sorry, enough about that. So the next thing, and this is also one of those infinitely helpful buttons, and it's right next, and it's also funny because sound, all this kind of stuff is designed by engineers, so they all think very systematic. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times boards are laid out in a way that makes sense logically for a workflow, right? And you're going to see that here in a second. This little button right here, and right now you have them all pressed in, which honestly, based on what I'm seeing on stage, makes a lot of sense. So this is what we call a low cut filter. I'm just gonna use this really quick to draw this for you. So we can hear, the human ear can hear from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz, 20,000 hertz, right? That's what we call the audible spectrum or something like that of what humans can hear. The highest we can hear pretty much is 20K. The lowest is 20. And so when you see something that says 100 hertz, what that is saying is that in this range, there is a marker at 100 hertz. That is a frequency that we can hear, right? That's within our hearing spectrum. And when you see that little symbol that's like, so from this off, just like that, see how it has this little shelf that dips down? It's basically saying that anything below that 100 hertz, I'm gonna get rid of. I'm gonna filter it out. The reason that is super helpful in a room like this is the frequencies that love to spin the longest are the low ones. They're the ones that will always end up creating that, you know what I mean? You've probably heard that in this room before. So that's what that knob does. The 100 hertz is pretty much a kick drum and a bass guitar, contrabass, cello, contrabassoon, like those big low note instruments. The human voice, on average, I would say very rarely goes below 160 hertz. So like that's a real bass if you've got anybody resonating that low, that isn't just microphone noise really at that point. So I always filter cut, which is like just a slang for this. I always low cut vocals, guitars, like electric guitars. I will filter pianos, but technically a piano can resonate that low because it does have 100 hertz and lower frequency overtone. So like if I don't have a bass player, I won't filter the piano because I want that low end when they play their left hand. But if I notice that they're one of those really heavy-handed, like heavy left-hand players, you've heard them, where they're really chord big down here. Sometimes I'll leave that open if I have the room. So this, I could say, boom, no filter. And now the piano is going to resonate in that lower register and really fill out the bottom end for me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and we normally either have a piano or an organ.
Right, and the organ. So the organ, I would make sure that if you have them, which I doubt you have the organ mic'd, right?
No,
We typically just leave the pulpit and lectern open.
I was gonna say it's. I'm sure it cranks in here. But if we had them organ mic'd or it was an electric organ, for example, I would have that off because those pedal tones really resonate down there and they sound beautiful. But everything else, I pretty much keep that button enabled because it gets rid of all sorts of unnecessaries. Like if somebody's walking and the stand vibrates a little bit, it cuts all of that out. It cuts out all those weird breath noises that people make, like that sound cuts all of that out. It cuts out weird feedback frequencies just from other instruments bleeding into the microphones. And you can hear, I don't know if you can hear this, but like the reverb in my voice is pitched lower than what you're hearing it here, right? That means this room resonates low anyway. So it's just gonna cut all of that resonant frequency out of the equation for you and make your job a lot easier. Yeah. But it's good to know what that button is because sometimes you may want that low end. So that's, in your guys' case, you're probably safe to leaving them all pushed in like that in a room like this. But, now you know what it is. And that also makes sense, right? I get my signal strength and then I get rid of anything, I get rid of the unnecessaries.
Right.
That engineering logic of, okay, I've got a good signal and now I'm gonna filter out all the unnecessary frequencies that I'm not gonna need for a vocal.
Nice.
Anything below 100 hertz, you're really not gonna need. Like this guy's low register resonates at about 185.
Yeah.
And he's got a decent range and a good resonating like voice, and that's low. Like, you know what I mean? And I've had some basses like really shock me on how low their notes can get, but human voice isn't that versatile. Okay, so that all makes sense?
So if he's singing and he's singing low, you want to turn that off?
Potentially. Usually for a human voice though, they're not going to be that low.
Okay.
So you can just turn them off. And even if they do kind of scoot down into that range by chance, or you get some kind of good resonating tone down that low, it's not going to this button won't thin that out enough to matter. You know what I mean? It's still going to sound good, like they're hitting a good low note. It usually is going to curve off any kind of microphone. We call it proximity effect. And that's when you get too close to it and it starts sounding like this. That's really the only thing that's going to be ringing that low. So just get rid of it. Cool. Anything else? Any other questions on that button? Cool. So then the next thing, and you can see that they did this in banks of 4. So 1 through 4 has a button, 5 through 8 has a button, 9 through 12 has a button. That's why they drew these lines. 48 volts, whenever you see a 48V like that, that is phantom power, is what we call that. In a phantom power button is for direct boxes and condenser microphones, sometimes guitar pre's, like just anything that kind of needs electricity from the microphone cable itself. So really, like, I imagine that probably the podium and lectern, the pulpit and the lectern microphones are probably condenser microphones that require phantom power. The two on the stands there by the music stands, they probably don't. But since they're 1 through 4, you have to turn them on for the pulpit, so you might as well just leave them on for the other two, right? The reason that phantom power exists is it literally sends 48 volts of electricity down the mic cable from the mixer to turn a microphone on or a piece of equipment on. So it's providing power. It's a power source from the board itself. Not a lot of stuff doesn't need it. So sometimes you don't even need the button. It doesn't kill. It doesn't hurt necessarily to have it. Over a decade or 2 decades of running phantom power on a microphone that doesn't need it, it will wear the mic down. But I mean, I don't know. I haven't really heard of very many people like blowing anything up, ruining a dynamic microphone with phantom power. They're built pretty rugged. So the only real thing that you need to worry about with phantom power, and I don't imagine that you guys would ever run into this situation, but just for your information, is if you have really old microphones like ribbon microphones, which were like the original studio microphone, phantom power can blow the ribbon in old microphones. That's because it came after, so they're not really designed to tolerate it. But usually a ribbon mic like that, and a ribbon mic from that era or something compatible or comparable to it is like $4,000, and you just wouldn't buy it. There's just no reason to buy them unless you're doing specialty work, because they're just the price point for people is just ridiculous.
So if it's really the pulpit and lectern that need the power, is it just safe to turn the rest of them off?
Yeah, like for example, like the piano may also need it. I don't know what mic system you have on that right now. So we'll leave those two on, but like these, they'll fade out eventually, I think.
Oh yeah. See it?
Yeah, that's the power dimming. That would be fine. These guys actually, this lapel, shouldn't need them either because those are powered from that, but sometimes they do in older ones, so I'll keep that on too. But yeah, like these ones, and it doesn't really matter. Like I said, if they're on and you plug something into it, chances are you're not going to necessarily break it. It's just again one of those things that's good to know, especially if you plug something in. Like let's say this is what will inevitably get you, is somebody accidentally turns the pulpit and lectern microphones off, and then you don't know about the 48 volt button, and you spend the whole time thinking that your mics are broken and that the channel's dead and that you got to replace the lines and all of this stuff, and really all it is this.
Just one button.
Right. Yeah, you heard them pop on. Yeah, should have had that muted, but yeah. And again, won't kill anything, but over time. The other reason that that's useful, let's say that you decided you wanted to take down the podium and lectern mics, or the pulpit lectern mics, to clean them or whatever else. It's good practice to undo the phantom power before you pull the cable.
Yeah.
Same thing as like, you know, if you have a device, any home appliance that you plug in with the power already. Yeah, it's just not
Power first.
cut the power first. It's just not good for it over time, right? To do that as habit. I doubt you guys really do that all the time, but yeah. Okay, any questions about that button?
Oh, that's good.
Love it. Okay, so this becomes the next, this is kind of the next like daunting like section. This is when we get into like equalization. And that is all about this little chart that I drew. So the audible hearing spectrum, right? The human hearing spectrum, where we have 20 hertz at the bottom, 20,000 kilohertz at the top. That's what all of the little symbols that you see and numbers here when it says like 450 or 13K, 3K, 350. That's all of the frequencies within this spectrum.
Okay.
So if I drew that out on a table, you would have all sorts of stuff in that window. EQing is actually the general rule of thumb is that less is more. That's the real magic of good audio is picking the correct microphone, putting it in the correct place, and getting it trimmed to the correct signal strength. If you get those three right, you'll do very little of this. EQ was added much later as a corrective measure for blending and mixing parts together. Like for example, if I have two microphones that are similar but two singers that are not, and I like you guys in this situation, I'm sure that you probably have female vocalists, male vocalists sometime.
Yeah, we have Ryan,
Right.
we have Sandy.
Yeah, right. And they're obviously just based on gender and vocal cord length and all of that alone, their voices are going to be different. So I can use these to kind of carve them both out, their own little pocket in the mix. And that's where that started to become really powerful and useful. In your case, you have what we call a 4-band EQ. So you can see that each of these sections, they have a top block here. These two knobs are another block. These two knobs are another block. And then this is a block. You see how they kind of group that up?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That is high, mid, low. That's what these symbols mean. So high filter, high mid filter, low mid filter, and then low filter. And actually, one of the things that I love about this board is how it sounds. The EQ section, the gain stage, the gain knob, or the preamps sound awesome. These boards sound great, really, really pretty, and really cool EQs. So to enable an EQ, you just push the button down, boom, and then this is direct or pre. That is based on what we're feeding into it. So. Typically, you're going to have it be, actually that's kind of funny. Typically, you're going to be looking at having it be direct, it looks like.